Who is this? I don't recognize her. Hashtag not my Elle Woods. Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to a rambling discussion on Illegally Blonde. The book. The original. Yep, before it was a musical, before it was a movie, it was a novel. But not just a novel, a self-published novel. And when I discovered that, I knew that I had to look more into it. If you've been around my channel for a while, you know that I am obsessed with indie books. I want to become the indie queen of BookTube. And the idea that a self-published book became such a cultural mainstay was really impressive to me. And I know, just so we're clear, I know someone would be like, Aragon? Yes, Aragon was impressive, but it has not become the icon that Legally Blonde has become. I have played in the musical of Legally Blonde. People have quoted the movie forever. They made things like the bend and snap, which, fun fact, isn't a real thing that exists in the real world, but they made it feel like a real thing. That's been this story's importance. So obviously, I wanted to see where it started. And I am very sad to say, the movie is better. Now this flies in the face of the common wisdom. Most people, especially bookworms, will tell you that when a book gets made into a movie, the book is always better. Usually because the casting for the movie was weird, or they cut crucial parts, or they just cut a part that maybe wasn't crucial but was a fan favorite for some reason. No, Tom Bombadil was not actually needed in the Lord of the Rings movies. Yes, he was great, still wasn't needed. So, as a result, it's kind of become just a cultural mainstay. The movie is always less than the book. If you want the real story, read the book. But I am here to tell you that your favorite part of Legally Blonde probably isn't even in the book. First, let's talk about the bare bones story that is there. The story does feature a young woman named Elle Woods who loves pink and has a chihuahua. In the book, he is not named Bruiser, he is named Underdog. A not so subtle reference to how Elle is an underdog. She is, at the beginning of the book, dating Warner Huntington III, who she believes will propose to her. Only when they go on their date, he breaks up with her instead because she's not serious enough, and also goes on to imply that he basically never loved her as much as she loved him, which, harsh, okay. Margot and Serena, her sorority sisters, are still here, as well as the entire sorority, and she decides to win Warner back. She will follow him to law school. Stanford Law School. Not Harvard in this one. My guess would be that it got changed to Harvard for the movie because Harvard is a much more recognizable name than Stanford. But I would assume an Ivy League law school doesn't change too much. I guess, I don't know. I've never been. But there, she realizes that Warner is engaged. Only in the book, her name is Sarah, not Vivian. I think I prefer the name Vivian a little bit more. That just feels a little bit more preppy. And she is preppy. Now, some of the other characters that you might recognize from either the movie or the musical are kind of in the cast, in spirit. There are women like Enid Hoops, but not by that name. There's nerdy guys like the guys you reference in both the movie and the musical, but not in exactly those names. The character concepts are there, albeit not the same exact characters that you might recognize. Now, the things that happen in between her going and the eventual murder trial for Brooke Vandermark, not Wyndham, in the book, not a lot happens that you would recognize. But there is still Brooke on trial for murder, although it's not actually the murder trial that Elle helps with. Essentially, Chutney, the deceased man's daughter, who is still in this book, she essentially is trying to sue to get the will overturned because the will left everything to Brooke instead of Chutney. So actually, the trial in the end of the book that Elle helps with, the iconic shower perm fiasco that most people recognize, is still in there, yes, but it's fighting over a will, not a murder trial, which is probably more realistic to the law, but is a lot less exciting. Now, I have no doubt that the author was pulling from her real life, mostly because the research I found stated that she was pulling from her real life. Amanda Brown did go to Stanford. I don't know if she had a chihuahua or loved pink, but she did state that a lot of the stories from this book were related to her real life, people she had actually met in one way or another. Now, that being said, this is not an autobiography. There is still elements of fictionalizing, so any critiques I make of the book are not critiques of Amanda as a person. I've talked about this before with other narrative memoirs or referring to your life. Living a life and trying to get that life down on a page in a way that is succinct and entertaining are two totally separate things. And just because something might have been a misstep while being put to page, that does not mean that the author is a liar or truly believes in whatever vibe that seems to come across in the book. We are going to be separating them out. So again, any critique of the book is not a critique of the author. I'm sure her experiences at Stanford Law were legit. Maybe she loves pink. I don't know. I think most people look good in pink, honestly. Regardless, let's move on to what wasn't in the book. What was made specifically for the movie. The thing is about the discourse around Legally Blonde is 70% of what most people consider iconic from the movie are movie originals. I did a little bit of research from an article posted for the 20-year anniversary of the movie's release that talked about all the work they did and all the rewrites they did to get the story to work. And it's very clear that they put in a lot of work. Obviously, they made a classic feminist masterpiece, but things like the entire character of Emmett Forrest. There is no romance in the original Legally Blonde. The entire character of Paulette. While yes, Elle does go to a nail salon regularly, the nail artist that she works with, Josette, is basically just a French stereotype there to do her nails. It's not a lot of a relationship. Josette does not have a lot of effect on the plot. There is no bend and snap. There is no UPS guy. There is no moment where Elle helps her get her bulldog back from a cheating ex. None of that, according to Paulette's character, is in the book. Those were all movie originals. But also, there's no professor hitting on her and then firing her when she rejects him. That was also a movie original, and also I think pretty iconic because it adds a lot to the narrative of women having to struggle to be taken seriously, even a woman as privileged as Elle Woods. Now I want to talk about the 3 areas that I think the movie and the musical did better than the book, and that would be the plot, the tone, and the protagonist. First up, the plot. It is, in a word, ambling. Now, I think we can relate this back to the author trying to relate to a lot of different stories from their time in Stanford under one umbrella, and this is usually a pretty tricky business when you're trying to take your real life and make it a linear story, because the sheer nature of lives mean that there's not a neat follow through. So a lot of the things that don't seem to really do much could just be a real life story the author really wanted to include, but there are things like random little things that happen in classes, a lot of legal talk. If you watched Legally Blonde, either the musical or the movie, and you thought, I really wanted more talk of law, you'd probably like the book more because there's a lot more of it. You follow Elle as she goes to a variety of specific classes. She goes and meets certain people. There is a costume party scene. However, it is an actual costume party. She is not tricked into going as a costume to a non-costume party. And that, again, it's like kind of in there, but it's not its iconic form that would later become to be known, and not a lot goes on in there. But the biggest thing with the plot that is very different is Elle is genuinely trying to get with Warner for much longer in the book than in the movie and the musical. In both the movie and musical, there's a moment, usually around the halfway mark, the exact end of the first act for the musical, and give or take the middle of the movie, in which she low-key kind of forgets why she was there, because she gets way more invested in law. In the book, the plot is much more heavily revolved around her getting him back, even after she knows that he is engaged. A lot more emphasis on her plotting and scheming and hating law. She hates law for a lot longer in the book, or she seems to. There's a lot of complaining about it. So whereas the movie and the musical, the plot shifts around the halfway point to her finding her power, in the original, it is about a man much more often. And as a result, you kind of, if you know the movie or the musical first, there's kind of this moment where you're waiting for a switch, right? You're waiting for the the moment. That moment never really comes because that was a movie original. Up next, the tone. The tone of this book is mean, like so much more mean-spirited than I was expecting. Now, this is kind of a stereotype of 2000s media at this point, but if you look back, the era of MTV reality shows created a very judgmental culture in the mainstream media. A lot of fat shaming, a lot of slut shaming, and all of that is present in the book. And the worst part is, it's present for Elle. And we'll get into this a little bit more when I talk about the differences between the protagonists of these stories. But basically, everyone is bad unless they look and act similarly to Elle. The narrative is kind to next to no one. It's kind to Elle. It's kind to Warner aesthetically, if not characteristically, is kind to Brooke Wyndham and Brooke Wyndham's lawyer, who again is not the professor, is a different character. But everyone else is basically a caricature. The caricature of the Trekkies, because this was back in the day when you could still genuinely use the word nerd as an insult and it would be insulting. They also hate on all of the women wearing headbands. That's bad. That's ugly, I think. There's a lot of focus on how everyone looks and how it's ugly and how they're not dressing as well as Elle. But most importantly, there's a lot of hatred of feminism, which makes me laugh. But basically, this is one of those early 2000s books that uses the word feminist as a pejorative. When it describes a woman in this book as a feminist, it is meant to be a bad thing. It is usually listed off of a bunch of other negative traits. And they talk about how, these professors, these feminists, they just hate men. They just are talking too much about the patriarchy, etc., so on and so forth. And yes, to a certain extent, this idea does still exist with Enid Hoops in both the movie and the musical, but it's way toned down. Enid could be a stand-in for 3 or 4 characters from the book. And while she does still exist, Enid also does still come around to Elle's side in the end. So even Enid gets a mini redemption arc, but yeah, it's so funny to me that this book that uses feminist as a pejorative, that seems to hate on feminists, right, got turned into an unabashed feminist masterpiece. Modern feminists hold Legally Blonde as being a very important piece of feminist media because it shows a woman getting to work her way honestly to the top while still maintaining her pinkish girly self. And she uses traditional feminine ideas because, yes, in both the book and the movie, the how could you take a shower if you just got in a per moment is still in there. But it's very important that it's her feminine knowledge that saves the day. I don't know if this was just the author being caught up in unexamined biases. I am not going to say anything about what the author feels about feminism. Again, this book was published over 20 years ago. That's plenty of time for thoughts and opinions to change. But it's just very amusing to me that the book that is not overtly anti-feminist, but doesn't think highly of it, gets turned into what is very blatantly considered feminist media. As I joked in the cold open, if you came to know Elle Woods through the movie or the musical, the book version of the character is going to be nearly unrecognizable to you. Yes, she is still blonde, affluent, she is still named Elle Woods, and she still has a chihuahua, but that's about where the similarities end. Personality-wise, the Elle Woods of the book is nearly an entirely different character. For one, she's mean, really mean. And I mentioned it before when we talked about tone, but she's judging everyone basically constantly. That's not to say that the Elle Woods from the movie or the book was perfectly flawless in this, but usually if she tried to take a shot at someone or insult someone, it was usually Vivian, who could be argued took the first shots and was already essentially trying to bring Elle down. So that could be as much a defense or return fire than anything else. But Elle Woods, from the book, she's judging everyone and thinking down on them, even if they barely ever speak to her. She hates the feminists. She hates activism. She doesn't even come to like her old sorority friends all that much. Her growth, such as it was, is very different than the movie or the musical. And I think you can chalk this up to the lack of Emmett or Paulette. In the musical and the movie, both Emmett and Paulette serve to show Elle her own privilege. Yes, Elle, as an attractive woman in law school, is a kind of underdog, but she's still very affluent. And Elle, in the movie and musical, is not mean. She's very kind, actually, but she's also, at least at the beginning of the story, very oblivious to her own privilege. So through talking and befriending Emmett and Paulette, she comes to see that, yeah, she's technically an underdog, but there are other people struggling. But it was that moment, that realization that other people were struggling, specifically the moment where Paulette tells her about the dog and the boyfriend that kicked her out but kept the dog but isn't treating it well, that Elle saw her chance and saw the empathy to help someone else as they were also suffering. And it was that moment that you really saw her begin to reckon with her privilege. There's even a moment in the musical where she talks about, was that law? Was that the point of law? And realizes, wait, I do like this. I like the idea of law because I can help people. I can help underdogs because I now know what it is to be an underdog, and I don't like the feeling, so I want other people to not feel that feeling. And that empathy, that loving the concept of law, the original idea of law as a way to help others, is one of the ways that Elle really endears herself to the audience. Book Elle never has that. She never really comes to love law at all. And while she can empathize, she's only empathizing with a specific kind of person. In the movie and the musical, Elle Woods earns herself friends all over the place because of her empathy, constantly looking out for others, and when she realizes how to use her privilege to help others, it becomes kind of easy to root for her, and she maintains her friendship with her old sorority sisters throughout. Basically, there's not a lot of reason to dislike her. But in the book, the only people Elle Woods empathizes with are people exactly like her. There are no impoverished characters, so she never empathizes with any of them. But you also have to be a certain kind of upper crust character to become on Elle's, friend list. Even her old sorority sisters begin to drift away from her, and she begins to decide that they're too vapid after she realizes that she wants to be one of the smart chicks now. But, again, she's not the biggest fan of most of the women at Stanford either, and deems them too frumpy, too feminist. The only characters that she empathizes with are ones that are basically her. They are both obsessed with vanity, but also with getting ahead. Girl bosses. Elle Woods of the book only wants to befriend girl bosses. There is a character named Eugenia who doesn't really add much other than being a friend for her, and there is Brooke Vandermark in the book, not Wyndham, who she has a much closer relationship with than in either the movie or the musical. She's not from the same sorority, and that was a whole big thing where when Elle tells her former sorority sisters that Brooke is from this other sorority, I don't remember the names, I wasn't in a sorority, they're all up in arms, you cannot defend one of them in a trial, and it was just very vapid. But that's the thing. The only friends Elle has, the only friends she deems worth her time not being judgmental around, are people that think and act exactly like her, which kind of flies in the point of empathy. And again, it just is such a different character. And I credit the writers of the movie and Reese Witherspoon and then later on Laura Bell Bundy for creating the lovable, good-hearted character that Elle Woods became, because it's really hard to root for Elle Woods in the book. It talks a lot about how, all of these people are looking down on her and they're hating on her, and yeah, they are, but she's doing the same thing back. Yeah, they're they're being very judgmental to her in the book. I'll be very honest about that. And she's being very judgmental back. So it kind of cancels out. It's really hard to feel bad for her when she's doing exactly what her bullies are doing. Now, I wanted to take a quick aside here to talk about the character of Brooke Wyndham, Vandermark, whichever. It's still essentially the same idea. She was a fitness empire owner and married an old dude, and old dude was found dead, and old dude's daughter claimed that Brooke did it. She's on trial for murder. And yes, in case you're wondering, spoiler alert, even in the book, Chutney is still the one that did it because she was trying to shoot Brooke. Now, in the movie and the musical, her alibi that she refuses to give, if you will remember, is that she was getting liposuction. And she doesn't want to reveal that because she is the owner of this fitness empire, and the knowledge that she was getting work done could hurt her career. And rightfully so. That would be a scandal because that is dishonest. That is false advertising because she is using her own body to show off her workout routines. And if that body was not gotten through workout routines hinting that it is false advertising. That would be bad. I feel like that plot point got looked over, got kind of glossed over in the movie and the musical, where we all just ignore the fact that, no, that's actually immoral, but we just let it happen. And, it's not, being put away for murder worthy, but it's still not great. Editing Margaret here. Quick point of clarification. I am not saying that the act of getting plastic surgery or liposuction is the immoral thing here. I'm saying hiding it and lying about it to sell a fitness product is the immoral thing. We've seen that in the real world with influencers who will try to sell weight loss products by showing before and after photos that are either photoshopped or were done using liposuction or other plastic surgeries. That's the immoral thing. If she had just gotten liposuction, that would have been whatever. But using a body not gained through the fitness routines to then sell the fitness routines through false advertising, that's what's wrong. And it really is surprising that that point gets glossed over. But that's not the alibi that Brooke has in the original book. Brooke in the book is actually way more of a deeper, nuanced character. Now, Brooke from the book, that's fun to say, does share a lot of similarities with her later counterparts. But there are some very big changes that change the way the reader views her. First of all, while she did originally come from wealth, her parents were toxic and abusive, and when she tried to tell her mother about her father's cheating, Mom essentially cut her off. And so in the middle of college, she is now on her own and has to make something of herself without any of her parents' vast wealth. And as a result, she is essentially a self-made, I think, millionaire. It never really says the word, but they still do say she has a bunch of businesses. So let's go with self-made millionaire. Now, the book also does a lot more to talk about why she fell in love with the elderly husband she took in the first place. He came to her because he wanted to prolong his life through getting healthier, and she helped him. And she was so impressed by his tenacity at his old age that that's why they originally started dating. But more important than that, her alibi in the book is so much more understandable. Rather than her trying to hide an immoral act that would essentially be fraudulent advertising, she's trying to keep essentially recovering addicts safe in their anonymity. It's like anemone. She is essentially a shopping addict. This was back in the days of the Home Shopping Network, basically the ye old version of internet shopping. And she has such an addictive personality that she ended up having to go to these what are known as shopper stopper meetings. And she met a lot of other people there. And after losing her parents, she basically took on these people, this group, as her new family. But that's where she was at when her husband was shot. Now, she tells her lawyer that she was at those meetings. But when lawyer asks, well, can we get the names of the witnesses from those meetings? She refuses. She says, I can't out these people as addicts. I can't reveal their addiction to the world. Because this also does a lot more to emphasize just how much the rumor mill around Brooke as a murderer has spread. And she knows that if she reveals the witnesses, it's going to be public. They're going to be as good as outed. And she refuses to do that. And that is so much more understandable than wanting to hide fraudulent advertising. And she even talks about how her husband really valued loyalty. And so in a way, her remaining steadfast and refusing to out her fellow addicts is her essentially last labor for him, her last act of love to him posthumously. It's actually this really sweet idea. Now, she does still do some other suspect things, like immediately starts looking for another person to get married to, and kind of has a breakdown on the stand. Girlfriend did not take her lawyer's coaching very well, but she's such a more well-rounded character. She's a character you can really empathize with. There's a lot more going into how much she loved her husband and why, and it really delves into how much she's innocent in all of this, which is more than Elle sees. All Elle needs to know that Brooke is innocent is that she's blonde. I'm not even joking. She goes to talk with the lawyer, gets the internship, all that. Literally, she asks, is Brooke blonde? He says yes. She goes, oh, well, then she's innocent. Chutney did it. That's it. She guesses Chutney did it from hair color. I'm so annoyed at Brooke Elwoods. Now, obviously, this should go without saying, but I'll say it anyway. This is all my opinion. Most people don't even know that Legally Blonde was originally a book. And honestly, like I mentioned before, if you like all of the iconic bits, those probably aren't in the book, so it's not necessarily something you have to read. But all that being said, yes, it was of its time, and yes, the movie and the musical do still have some issues that didn't age great. The gay man on the stand was not in the book, and that was to its credit. Bisexuality exists. Regardless, I still hold, in this instance, that the movie and the musical are better than the book. I mean, I actually hold that the musical is better than the movie because I like some of the changes the musical made to the ending above the movie, but that's neither here nor there. Regardless, I do still think that this story holds up for a reason. It became a movie for a reason, and it remains in the common cultural zeitgeist for a reason. The idea that you can look how you feel inside and still achieve great things is something incredibly powerful to know. I personally, in only the last, couple of years, have fully come into my full cottagecore Ren Fair everyday lifestyle, and still getting to live the life I want and accomplish the things I want is incredibly freeing. The message that you can be yourself and still win is a great message to have, regardless of the form that it's in. I did end up giving the book 3 stars, which for me is a pretty neutral rating. There was a lot to add on to it from the movie, like in the case of Brooke, but overall, if I want to learn more or watch again the story of Elle Woods, I'm probably going to do the musical. Maybe the movie if I'm feeling it, or if my sisters force me to, but most likely the musical. What about you? Do you love Legally Blonde? Have you ever read the book? Is there another instance where you think a movie was better than its book? Please let me know down in the comments below. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.